Your turn, Yugi boy.
What is up, guys? This is Linthio coming into a discussion today about something that I've been thinking about for a while, and that is, are boss monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Getting too strong? So stay with me on this one, because I have been playing this game from the moment go, and I've seen pretty much every boss monster that there is. I feel like I have a pretty decent grounding and knowledge to talk about this. Boss monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are simply defined as, if we just take, so for example, archetypes, it is the biggest monster in that archetype that has the most powerful effects. Normally, that will be considered the boss. Like in games where you have like a dungeon and at the very end there's a boss, it's the biggest thing, it's the most powerful. Same thing for the archetypes, you normally have one of those bosses. If you basically think of it like king and queen and then all the knights, the king is the boss. Not to say that there aren't maybe other queen-like monsters that are still powerful, but there's always normally one that is spearheading. Much like in Cosmos, Dark Destroyer is pretty much the boss of the deck. So it's not completely restricted to archetypes, but it's more than less it is. So for example, like Dark Arm Dragon back in the day, Dark Arm Dragon was a boss monster, but it wasn't confined to being an archetype boss monster. I already know a lot of people are going to be saying, well, Alinthio, you're just moaning. These bosses are fine, it's nice to see big boss monsters. Well, it is. I'm not moaning about that. This is just a discussion to see whether they are or whether they aren't. So if we look back in the day at things like Rainbow Dragon for Crystal Beasts, Dark Arm Dragon, Venomarga, and all for Venoms, and all these different types of things, they are pretty decent boss monsters. Venomarga was a brutally good one, but is very impossible to summon. Rainbow Dragon is a awful boss monster. Sorry, Crystal Beast fans, but it wasn't really used, was it? And then you had Dark Arm Dragon, which was a completely expensive card, about 200, 300 pounds, and you needed 3 of them. But then we look at the boss monsters of today. We have Dark Destroyer, which cannot be targeted, destroys a card on the field, and is just a 3000 attack that can be summoned very, very simply. Then you have, for example, the Blue Eyes. We have Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon that may or may not be coming out. That is the definition of a boss monster. Does double damage, 4000 attack. Pretty good. And you have a whole other host of them, of course. Are they getting too powerful? If we compare Dark Destroyer and compare Dark Arm Dragon, Dark Arm Dragon could destroy as many cards as possible, right? As long as you had obviously dark targets. Dark Destroyer comes out and it cannot be targeted by card effects. So straight away, on that point, Dark Destroyer has one up against Dark Arm Dragon, simply because it's easier to kill Dark Arm Dragon than it is Dark Destroyer. Then you have Dark Armed that can pop multiple cards depending on what darks you have in the graveyard. Dark Destroyer, whenever it just comes out, it just pops a card. Meh, you can take that one whichever way you want it. There are certain requirements, so on and so forth. But it makes it easier to activate Dark Destroyer simply because it can't be targeted. Dark Arm Dragon is also a little bit more difficult to summon because you have to have exactly 3 darks in the graveyard, whereas Dark Destroyer, very simple to summon. Now I know comparing those two, you might say, well, you're obviously comparing a 2008-ish card to a 2016 card, and yeah, I completely get that. There's obviously going to be disparities in them and obviously power levels. But what I'm trying to get at is the creep between boss monsters that were in the original game and then boss monsters that are now. The ceiling has been raised completely. You can put it down to say, hey, well, that's the power creep. We all know about the power creep, and that's just simply what it is. But archetypes in general are more powerful than they were back in the day. And even before we didn't really have archetypes, they were just cookie cutter decks, having all the best cards and so on and so forth. But now we have these monsters that simply end the game by themselves. It's just really interesting to see how these boss monsters are going about and basically just brutalizing the game. That's exactly what they're doing. Dark Destroyer is simply one of the best boss monsters around right now. Then we look at, for example, Ignister. You could say Ignister was or still is a boss monster for the Performer Pal engine, because that Ignister is a monster. You come out, non-targeting removal, special summoning, absolutely brutal, 2850 attack is very, very good. And it wasn't out to Dark Destroyer because doesn't target. You also have the new Drake Overlord Ritual that is just really good. Skips your opponent's main phase, comes down, does damage. It's just brutal, and that is a really good boss monster that's fairly easy to summon as well. Overall, it's just really interesting to see how many of these actual considered boss monster cards are becoming more and more powerful, whereas back in the day you would more overlook them and say, well, the cost to summon this isn't really that great, and the archetype is just fine as it is, so I'll just use it like that. But now you have some that are pretty simple to summon, and also just insanely powerful. So you're just like, I'm just gonna slap 3 of these in straight away. I'm not saying that I want to go back to the days of Venomarga where you have a ridiculous monster that if you can summon it, you're basically gonna win the game. But it's really difficult to summon because one of the cards, the Venom King, is pretty difficult to summon himself, and then you also have to have the trap when it's destroyed to successfully resolve to get Venomarga out from the hand deck or graveyard. I'm not saying I want to go back to that, but some boss monsters could be considered a little bit overpowered, but I don't think Konami have hit the ceiling on it just yet. I don't think there are too many powerful boss monsters. I think that's the way that it's starting to go, because it's always nice to have one card that is a game ender, but at the same time it's also pretty unhealthy to do so. So I want to know what you guys think. It was a bit of a really random ramble with no direction, if I'm completely honest, so apologies for that. It's just a really different, interesting discussion for me, because there are so many ways that you can go with it, there's so many differing opinions, and there are so many different cases for the for and against arguments. So I want to know what you guys think. Let me know what side you're on, if you're saying that boss monsters are getting too strong or if they're just fine. So as I said, let me know down in the comment section below. Make sure to give me a like, comment, subscribe, and I should catch you guys later.